And we never know how what we say sticks with other people.
Welcome to the LabVIEW Experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes. Today we have a real treat. We have Johanna Rothman, who some of you may know. It's a name that I've heard before many times. I'm pretty sure we have some mutual friends. I think JB Rainsberger maybe, and Trisha
Yeah.
Broderick, and Llewellyn, and some of those people. Because I know I've been recommended some of your books before, although I have to say I haven't gotten around to reading them. But I was quite thrilled when you reached out. So uh, the first question I have actually is, how did you find us?
I believe you recently interviewed Dave Thomas of the Pragmatic Programmers. Was that, did you recently interview
That
him?
wasn't me, but that is a great
Oh,
interview. I
oh
wish that was
no,
me. Well, if you know him, maybe you could make me an introduction.
I will. I will.
Perfect.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'd be
But
glad to have him on. But yeah, I've interviewed JB and Trisha and probably some of those people. So
yeah, no, I saw you somewhere on Blue Sky or Mastodon,
mhm.
and whoever you were interviewing said interesting stuff about experimentation. And I of course then looked you up, and because I'm so shy and retiring, and I'm writing a book about effective public speaking, I
Oh,
reached out and I said, okay, maybe we might have an interesting conversation.
yeah. No, when Taylor sent over the email and I saw your name, I was like, how did Taylor? I was like, Taylor knows Joanna. Okay, that's cool. So yeah, it all works out. Um, one of the things that you mentioned that you want to talk about, and I think the theme fits directly with with this whole podcast. You wrote a series of books
Yeah,
about leadership, right? So it's like how to. I'm looking at the titles: practical ways to lead and serve yourself, and then to lead and serve others, and lead an innovative organization. So all about managing yourself and then a team and then an organization. But
right,
you mentioned there's some principles in there, and one of them was experimenting.
right. That if as a manager you do not encourage experiments and learning, you will be stuck. And stuckness is a really bad thing because because you can't figure out how to go forward, and you often don't have the means to go backwards. Right? We are sometimes we can go back, right? We always talk about resilience as bouncing back, but I think of resilience as bouncing forward to something new. And the more we try and um, go back, the more stuck we get. So instead of being stuck, I really want to be unstuck and figure out what is the smallest experiment I can do right now that allows me to make forward progress or really get the outcome I want.
So, what do you think is the biggest impediment to people adopting this idea of doing more experiments?
I think it's partly fear and partly the culture of too many organizations. That way too many organizations reward people for either firefighting or doing what they expect other people to do. I find this notion of cascading OKRs just a horrible, horrible thing. And that's not what the OKR people who teach it actually say to do. But the whole notion of a cascading thing that you can put a goal up here and cascade it down to the various levels of the organization. First of all, that's a culture that says, only senior leaders can figure out the next experiment, and all the rest of us just have to fall in line and figure out what to do. And secondly, it creates a culture where we already know what we want to have happen. And we're recording this in August of 2025, right? Depending on when you publish it, who knows? But um, right now we are in the midst of worldwide change for absolutely everything, right? It does not matter what you think about it. We are in the middle of change. How can we limit the knowledge to just one level of the organization and not ask every single person in the organization to do something interesting and different, all to support, to optimize up for an overarching goal, not to take that goal and cascade it down.
One of the things I've noticed, so I'm working with this organization at the moment, and they are very resistant to change, but they don't have, and this is probably related to the experiment, they don't have a way to change things. So like you find a problem, and it's like, oh, go fill out a Jira ticket, and we'll get to it later. And my immediately my you can see the expression on my face. I'm saying, oh. And how do you yeah how do you change the culture of an organization like that? I guess maybe
So
that's
that's
too broad, but
so some of my friends will say that that organization has inoculated itself against change. And I don't actually believe that. I believe that those organizations are so consumed by the pressure that they feel that they cannot imagine, literally cannot imagine a way to take care of a little problem now, to solve problems that to prevent problems later. So in that case, there's the story plus the logic idea, right? I often start change with telling a story about what happened to me when I was in their position and I made the same decisions that they made. And then I tell the story of how I changed my mind because of some event, right? Something happened that made me change my mind. And the outcome was this other thing. So, right. So if you tell people stories, stories change people's minds. Logic never, never does. I mean, we would like to think of ourselves as logical humans. Yeah, yeah, maybe one time out of 10. But we respond really well to stories. So if you say, so for example, I will tell you the story of a short-sighted decision I made back when I was an early manager. One of my one of my people came to me and said, JR, we really need some education about this kind of thing because we keep making the same mistake. And I said, I know, but we're really busy and we don't really have time for the training. And and she said, how about if I keep track of the number of times we encounter the same mistake in the next 2 weeks? I said, okay, if we make that same mistake 3 times in the next 2 weeks, I will arrange for training. 2 days later, she came back to me with a list of 4 times. And that's when I said, okay, you're right. Right. I was totally wrong. You were totally right. Let me go argue for money and explain the cost of doing business the way we are doing it now and explain to my management that you collected 4 times for this, right? I would tell her story and then explain the cost of doing it the same way. It still took my manager 6 weeks to figure out that we could arrange for training. And it turned out, of course, that when I arranged for training, the teacher who was a consultant actually used our code and helped us realize how we could do it ourselves. Training paid for itself inside of a week. And this is the kind of and of course we fixed it in the workshop, right?
Mhm.
So when I tell this kind of a story all the time because chances are good I made the same kind of a mistake. And the story itself explains if you just measure the cost of doing it wrong, sometimes people agree with that, but more often they need to see the effects on themselves in this situation. But I never ever tell people that they're wrong for thinking something because that also does not work.
Yeah, that's some Jerry Weinberg wisdom there of like, you definitely, yeah, starting out a conversation with "you're wrong" never really goes anywhere productive. So,
No,
yeah.
no,
And also, like, if you're in their shoes, like this organization I'm working with, as much as I'm frustrated by it, they are, as you mentioned, under a lot of pressure. And I always use the analogy, it's like you're walking along, you see a guy chopping down a tree with an old, dirty, rusty axe, and you're like, "Hey, why don't you stop and sharpen your axe?" And they look at you and they're like you're crazy because can't you see I've got to chop down all these trees? I got to clear this whole forest. I don't have time to stop and right. And I think that is a large part of it is just being so consumed. And the other part of it too, and I think you hit on this, is making invisible things visible. There's lots of things that the people making the decisions don't necessarily see, partly because they're removed, and they don't necessarily. I don't know that they need to see everything, but we have to figure out a way to surface the things that they should see.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's a really big deal, right? Um, and to do that, we don't have to have perfect instrumentation or data. All we need is indications often of something that's useful, right? Useful. So I did not ask this woman how many people were affected by this one problem that she kept telling me about that I kept poo-pooing. I asked her to count how many times did we have the same problem. I was expecting 4 times, maybe 3 times in 3 weeks. And when it was 4 times in 2 days, yeah, that was very, very interesting.
Yeah, it kind of also goes back. There's an XKCD comic of like, how much time can I spend automating something versus how often I do it and how often it happens. And, you know, if there's some problem, but it happens like once a year and it costs you like an hour, like, you learn to live with that pretty easily. But, something that you do every day, even if it only costs you a few seconds, if you do it multiple times per day, all of a sudden you do the math and you add up that time and it's like, oh, yeah, that could be a really big change.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah.
Another thing you hit on that I like to say too is things don't necessarily need to be perfect in order to be useful or valuable. So like, and I think this hits on a couple levels. So like one is like, oh, I could make a tool to do that, but it wouldn't be perfect. And it's like, well, if it helps you and it's useful, but also too, like companies like trying to push products out the door get stuck with that a lot too. If you're a product company, right? Like it's the old like waterfall way of thinking of like, oh, it has to be perfect before I give it to somebody. And I think hopefully people have kind of realized that's a bad idea. At least some of us have. I think there's still some people who are hold on to that idea.
I think that's well, I have a lot of gray hair and I started my career as a software engineer in 1977. I never worked with a tester until I became one in 1985. So that was a long time between how could I possibly test my own code and know that I had anything useful versus when other people encountered it. And when I started to test other people's code, um, a lot of the managers, right, the senior level managers said at the time in the 1980s, this was very common. We were supposed to separate testing from development. I have never understood that because testing is on an auditing function. Testing is an integral part of product development in any organization. So when my manager said to me, "You should be independent of the developers," and I would say to them, but I sit with them at lunch and they tell me all kinds of interesting things about how they think their code is going to work. And then when I go back into my office and I test it, I realize their idea of what they thought they were implementing is not the same as what they implemented. Now, which one is right? Sometimes it was what they thought, sometimes it was as it was. And if I had not had useful partnerships with these people, I would never have known. So I think a lot of it is from that old fashioned thinking of separating testing from development. And the other part is, I don't know about you, I suffer from a lot of perfection rules. I am very reluctant to release my products before they are ready. And that too often includes my books.
Yeah, that's definitely. I've noticed in the publishing world, so I haven't written any books, but there is a lot. There are a lot of authors now that are like doing this like incremental publishing model.
Mhm.
I think Manning calls it like early access program or something where they push out early releases and get feedback. Um, I think the separating the testing and development really gets into the heart of basically breaking that feedback loop.
Right.
And and I have a friend who talks about the idea of immediacy, right? So
Mhm.
you one of the great things about like Microsoft Word or whatever, if you're typing in Microsoft Word, you make a change, you see it immediately. Versus
Mhm.
like, I like Markdown and stuff, but like if you've got Markdown and then you have to run it through a render in order to see the change, right? You lose that immediacy factor. And
Well, yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, so it's like, if you've ever logged into a remote computer and you're trying to type and there's like a lag,
Oh,
everybody's experienced that, right? And you like overtype it and then you're like, oh wait, and then you go back, but you don't go back far enough, and it gets really you get really confused and it becomes hard to use really quickly.
so I published my first four books with the Prags, and they have this notion of beta books. And I'm now using LeanPub because I self-publish. So I've been writing in Markdown kinds of languages for a very long time. Um, And on LeanPub actually suggests that its authors publish as soon as they have written anything at all useful. And that is my problem. How do I know that what I've delivered is useful? I'm good enough at Markdown to just write reasonable markdown, right? That's not the issue. All right. The markup language never bothers me. But do I know that this page or two or half of a chapter is useful? And that's the part where my perfection rules come in.
Yeah, well, I think that becomes too the difference between when you're testing, you do verification and validation, right? The verification is, oh, I typed it correctly and it shows up the way I want it on the page. The
Mhm.
validation part is that information actually useful? And the same thing with coding, right? You're writing code, does it compile? Does it pass all the tests that I think it should pass? Great, but is it actually useful for the end customer? Because I could be solving the wrong problem, or
You're
maybe I
right.
misunderstood what they wanted.
So I've actually done a little experiment with my effective public speaking book over this past year and a half. I started writing the book oh, a long time ago, lot longer than I thought it would take me to finish this book. And the reason it turned out that I had trouble finishing the book, I actually rewrote it in the spring this past year, is because I did not have a really good idea of who my ideal audience was for this book. At first, I made it way too general. So the book was useful, but not as useful as it could be. And so that's why I rewrote it in the spring. However, my experiment with this was I write a little podcast every week of supposedly a minute, but it's often a minute and a half of of just which is about 150 words from the book. And that did a whole lot of things as a forcing function. Even when I was busy on other writing or other deliverables for my clients, I really needed to do at least a couple hundred useful words. So I had something for this podcast every week. And people who I think are my ideal audience have actually commented on it on the YouTube channel. So I did not expect any of this when I started to do my weekly writing whip.
Yeah, I find it's very interesting. Often you start using one good practice and suddenly you realize that there are benefits that are not even like what you're looking for. As an example, I had a conversation with JB where we were talking about refactoring, right? And so, okay, refactoring is this great skill and it lets me tackle legacy code and change it, and that's great. But the biggest benefit to me was that I didn't have to do any design up front anymore. I didn't have to worry about getting things right. I could just get it close enough and then ship it and see what happened, knowing that then I could go add the whatever features I wanted later because it would be easier to refactor. And that
Hmm.
was something that did not occur to me when I started learning about refactoring. I was just like, I've got this chunk of legacy code. I've got to go figure out how to work with it. So yeah, that
Yeah, I mean, I think that anything that you can do like that, where you cycle through the work, the work in progress. I do that for my writing because I don't code anymore. But the more we cycle through to clarify what we mean, the better the outcome is. And the faster we do that, right? The faster that feedback loop, the easier it is and the faster it is to get to a useful outcome.
So I watched this really interesting series of videos, and it was a writing professor from the University of Chicago. But he had some very interesting stuff, and his thing was basically like, if somebody hands you a piece of writing and wants you to evaluate it, you can't evaluate it in a vacuum. You have to understand the intended audience and the intended function of, like, is it supposed to be persuasive? Is it supposed to evoke this emotion or that emotion? And writing code, we use the word writing code because it's very much like you're writing. And so a lot of these things like having a target audience in mind, if you don't, you're not going to write good code if you don't have a target audience in mind.
Hmm.
Like you can't write good marketing copy or a good book if you don't have some sort of goal.
Well, and for me, it's exactly the same, the target audience. I often have, so for the Modern Management Made Easy books, there was a guy I met in 2012 or something who was very suspicious of every single thing I wrote. He'd been following my blog for several years, and I will call him Steve because that's not his name. And Steve said, he was from the Netherlands and he had this great Dutch accent. And he said, I do not believe anything you write, Johanna. I just don't believe it. And then I try it, and you're right. I don't understand how you can do this. And I said, and that's when I realized I was not including enough stories in my writing at that time to convince him because I wasn't trying to convince him I was right. I just wanted my readers to try something else that they had not considered yet. So, so I write to Steve. I use Steve for the Modern Management Made Easy books. I even had a picture of Steve in my mind, and I said, if this does not convince you, Steve, I don't know what will. So, and I find that the more I write, the more I need an ideal reader. And I might have to write the same thing from two perspectives. So I often write for managers and then I write the other thing for individuals or teams. Or I do it the other way around.
Yeah, so that was going to be my question. So you've got those three management made easy books. Are they're the three books because there's three different skills, or is each one written for a different target audience?
Well, there are three different skills, which is really how do you go from individual contributor to coaching those people, right? So if you get your first promotion into management, you were doing the work. How do you now coach the people doing the work? And if you move into middle management, you were doing the work of a first line manager. How do you now coach those first line managers so you are not still doing that work? Et cetera, et cetera, right? So every time you move up in the organization, we can talk about hierarchy at some point, but organizations are still hierarchies. Um, every time you move up in the organization, you have to stop doing the work you did do. You have to, because otherwise you're not doing the strategic work at your level that you are being paid to do. So that's why there's practical ways to manage yourself. And then to lead and serve others is all about how do you create a team of people who can deliver as a team? We know we talk so much about performance management and it's all about the individual. I've been a consultant now for 30 years. No one's given me a performance management. No one's managed my performance except for me. Luckily, I have great clients, and when I don't deliver or I deliver something wrong, they say, that's not what I expected. And I say, okay, let's deal with that particular issue. Is that because I did not explain, or is that because you don't want to do it, or is it something else? And now we have a conversation, right? I get the feedback really fast on my work. And so often people in the organization don't get any feedback about that. And that's because they're too splintered and there's all kinds of stuff. But if you really want to have cohesive teams, do useful work with outcomes that the organization can use, you need to figure out how to manage teams, right? Not just manage yourself. And that's not just saying, oh, you're now a team. You have to create an environment so the team can thrive. And then for practical ways to lead an innovative organization, if you're not managing the project portfolio, there is no way you can lead an innovative organization, right? It's just the pressure of all the work and trying to do everything instead of focusing on the few pieces that matter. Yeah, that's really the basis of it. And having cohorts at the management level. Because a lot of management decisions take forever, and that's often because managers try and work alone. So that doesn't work either.
Yeah, I have a bunch of competing thoughts in different directions we could go. But I think the thing I want to go down the rabbit hole is this idea of people doing the work and being very busy, but not necessarily being very effective, and this like not prioritizing stuff well.
So let me just pick on that word prioritization for a minute. A lot of times we say prioritize, and that allows buckets of this all this stuff is number one, and then this bucket is all number
Yeah,
two,
yeah.
and this bucket is all number three. Um, I don't do that. I insist on ranking, which is one number one, one one number two, one number
Mm.
three. And then if there's anything left after that, that's all in a bucket. And that actual ranking idea works at a team level. Well, it certainly works at the individual level, right? And then it works at the team level because I see so many so-called agile teams who have backlogs and roadmaps of thousands of things. And then there's all the defects in Jira. I mean, they are overloaded with work. Instead, if the product leader actually said, here's the one thing I want you to do today, team. Let's do this. And we all focused on that. I'm a big fan of swarming and mobbing. Um, not so, I used to really be a big fan of pairing, but that does not bring all the rest of the people into the same problem. So I'm now a fan of swarming and mobbing. But the more we limit WIP, the work in progress for a given team, and then all focus on that, the faster we get the work done. Right. And everybody knows this. And if they measure the flow metrics and the cycle time, yeah, they would see that. So if we only regularly ship one thing a week, why even look at anything else? Why not clarify that one thing, all work on it that one week, and then if you're in Wednesday and you're ready for more work, now you take one more thing. It makes all the planning so much easier. So I really like the idea of how can we focus our limited attention down on the fewest possible things? How can we all collaborate to achieve those outcomes? Right. And then that's why ranking, I'm really big on using the word ranking now, not prioritization.
Yeah, no, I like that. I always used to say priority is singular.
Yes.
As soon as you tell
Yes.
me you have priorities, I'm like, wait, what? How does that work? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I also like the idea of swarming and mobbing, but I tend to have trouble trying to sell it to people. I get this like visceral negative reaction, which I find very surprising because they say, "Oh, that can't be possible. That's inefficient." But the second there's a problem, like, "Hey, you five people, we need you in one room. Go sit in front of the computer and figure it out." So it's like this disconnect somewhere.
So yeah, we called them tiger teams
Yep.
back in the 70s and 80s and stuff. So we didn't have the same words we have now. And when I and a lot of that is because we get we get rewarded for our individual work. So when my managers, I was on a tiger team for about 3 or 4 months back in the I think the late 80s. And my managers, well, my manager said to me, "We don't know how to reward you for all that work. You were really instrumental, right? You and the other four people in figuring out how to release this product. However, we don't know how to reward you because we don't know what each of you did." I mean, so we shouldn't collaborate together. So what I said to him was, take a pot of money, divide it equally among all of us, and reward us that way. And he said, "I don't know if that will work." I said, "My wallet will tell me it will work." This is right. Why are we so focused on the individual? And there's all kinds of reasons for that, but cost accounting is one of them. But I think it's really important to say we don't need to manage and measure people the way we used to. That's not how the world needs us to work. If we want if we want to refactor and pair with somebody, why do we care how the pair works? And if we want to swarm as a team, how can we possibly know who did what? Because we're bouncing ideas off of each other right now in this conversation, and I think we're offering a lot of value to the listeners later. So did Samuel come up with that or did Johanna? Well, it's a collaborative conversation. How can we possibly assign value to either one of us? The outcome, the conversation is what's valuable.
Yeah, no, that definitely one of the things, so I think you mentioned the word hierarchy earlier, and I think that kind of goes into like the flattening of the hierarchy as well, of breaking down some of those silos and stuff. But also like my thought jumps to like what you said, like if you got a team and they need rewarded, give the reward to the team. But also like, you could let if you thought that not everyone on the team contributed equally, right? Like maybe if some person was only there halftime or whatever, give the pot of money to the team and let the team decide how to divvy it up, right? And let them agree. And like they might all agree, like, hey, this guy was only here halftime. He only gets half of what everybody else. Fine, that works.
And the team everybody would probably agree to that, right?
Yeah.
Um, I actually did that once I believe in the 90s. I don't remember. The story is in I think Practical Ways to Lead an Innovative Organization because I think performance management at the individual level is just nuts. So I what I often do is say if the team always knows who is contributing and how, and the team always knows so I'm a big time extrovert, right? Everybody knows what I'm thinking because no filter between brain and mouth. And there are plenty of introverts who are actually really good at facilitating me because they will do something like hold up a finger, which means Johanna, hush your mouth for just a second so other people can take in information and then say something. And I have trained many teams to work with me like that because even though I see people trying to maybe say something, I don't always react well enough in real time. So this is a collaborative event between the other person and me, or whatever, or with the team and me. But somebody else often facilitates who is not the named facilitator for the team.
Mhm.
right? And how is that person more or less useful than somebody with this brilliant idea who can then convince everybody, here's the great design we should start with as a straw man? Both
Mhm.
of those people have a lot to offer. And how can you say one of them is more valuable than the other? I don't see how you can. But the team always knows who is delivering and who is not.
Yeah, and also too, sometimes like our value, like I think of like a sports team, right? I'm not a big sports person, but when I was a kid, it was like the Chicago Bulls. You had like Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan, and they were all good players. But if you took one of those players out of the team and put them somewhere else, yes, they have individual talents, but would they still perform the same way, right? Because there's something about the teamwork together that makes it worth more.
Yeah.
That's more
That
value. Yeah.
And so I suspect you have seen people who were, quote, failures on one team, and then they moved to another team and became really valuable contributors on that
Mhm.
team, right? They just, they didn't sync, um, they did not sync with the other people on that first team, but they did on the second. And I think it's so important for people to realize, especially for managers to realize, if you think you have a problem person, it might be the entire team, and this person is not somehow syncing or collaborating with that team, not that the person is a problem.
Yeah, I wonder too if that touches on like psychological safety or something where like maybe they don't feel safe contributing.
It easily could be. Kurt Lewin, who was a psychologist, I'm not sure what he did, but he said that anybody's given performance was a function of their environment. So the environment is the overall corporate culture, the team's culture, any pressure you put on that person, right? Almost, if I spent a lot of time hiring people in the 80s and the 90s, and then later from my clients in the O's and the teens. And what I often found was we almost never fired anybody for their technical abilities, but we too often fired people for their inability to contribute inside this particular team. And that meant their personal qualities, preferences, and non technical skills were way more important than any of their technical skills. Right. So,
Yeah, well, you mentioned the swarming, and I found that when you're doing the swarming, the individual technical skills become less important. Right? Like it helps to have like a baseline technical ability.
yeah,
Beyond that, like and I found too, like being a consultant, I've found that people, particularly consultants, tend to want to focus on technical things, and they we all think we need to be better technically. And I just don't find that to be true in most things. I find that like you have to be technical enough to solve the problem, but there's so many other skills that are non-technical, like just the sales, the marketing, the personal interaction, the teamwork, collaboration, all those skills are way more important.
yeah, because because your clients are hiring you for your ability to see and solve that problem.
Mhm.
And solve almost never as a consultant means by yourself, and almost always means with other people in some way. And sometimes the best value you can offer as a consultant is to be able to explain to other people how you see the problem, right? And what the problem is. So if you ever wanted to help this client solve the problem of they postpone a lot of this, um, the bugs that they find, and just put another ticket into Jira, you might ask them, do you ever want to address this problem? Right?
Yeah,
I, yeah,
yeah, go.
because I would never say add that to the current That's a different kind of consulting than any technical consulting, because now you're really talking about the culture. But you might ask them and then say, um, what prevents us from doing it now? You might do a force field analysis, right? The the things that prevent us from solving this problem and the things that might allow us to change this problem. So using your critical thinking skills are often much more valuable than any technical skills. And I bet you do that on the technical problems already.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the big thing I think consultants can provide sometimes is framing because when people come to me, they come to me with the symptom, not necessarily the underlying problem. They don't even realize sometimes that there's an underlying problem. And if you can do this right as a consultant, you win pretty big because you solve the underlying problem and you solve not just that symptom, but a whole bunch of other symptoms that are also going on. And you
Yeah.
really come out looking like a rock star if you can get that diagnosis part right to find the underlying problem.
And that's often your ability to see the system, right? It might be the architecture of this particular application or product, but it's often that's often not the only piece of it. It's all how the people interact and the how the organization works. So yeah,
Yeah, like for example, this project I'm working on now, like they're behind on this project and they think that the problem is that they're behind on this project, but really it's they're getting in their own way and their tools and processes and stuff. And if they fixed that, not only would they solve this problem, but like the course that they're going, they will eventually fix this problem and then they'll just move on to the next project and they'll have the same problem over again.
yep,
And yeah, but there is like a framing issue of trying to get them to buy into that new frame of reference is hard. Yeah.
yeah, and especially if it if that new frame of reference challenges everything they believe about organizations and product development and anything else, if it challenges everything they believe, then the only way to do this is to start gathering stories so they can see how they might consider changing.
Yeah, I think I kind of hit on that a little bit because like I would come in and I'd be like, oh, we should fix this. And they'd be like, oh, we don't have time. And then I just fixed something on my own. And I called him over. I was like, hey, let me tell you about this. I was like, I was doing this and I made this one change. It took me 5 minutes and it just saved me like 3 or 4 hours. And he's like, oh.
Right.
And I could see the light bulb kind of going off in his face, like, oh, that's what you've been talking about. I'm like, yeah. I was like, yeah, I was like, this is just one example, but yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, it is helping a little bit, and I can kind of see a little bit of a shift. So, but
Yeah.
that's just one person in a large organization, though, which is kind of part of the problem. It's, yeah.
I don't think you should underestimate yourself like that. I'm going to inflict a little help on you. I think that if you ever talk about yourself as just, you really do yourself a disservice. You influenced at least that one other person, right? When you showed them what you did. And um, that person will take that and they might not be able to use it at this organization, but they will take it with them when they go to their next job and they're into the rest of their lives. So you actually gave them an example of showing how just a little bit of time and an application of looking above the problem, going meta on the problem, that you could solve this particular problem for yourself and for them. And you gave them enough information for them to be able to try that again themselves. We are all like the pebble in the pond, right? Drop the pebble in and we get a bunch of ripples. Some of those ripples just go away. Some of them, they stick with the other people. And we never know how what we say sticks with other people. So please do not say just about yourself anymore. Thank you.
Point well taken. Earlier we were talking about people getting promoted, and it just reminded me I had a note here. I want to make sure circle back around to that. But I read a book once called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," and I thought
Yep,
that just the title alone I thought was really great. And I think, I think you hit on it when we were talking, just like when you're an individual contributor, you need the technical skill, you need to be doing the work, and then as you move up, the job description of what you're doing changes.
yep.
And so it requires different levels of skill. That was one comment I had from earlier. And the other thing I took out of our thing, you mentioned that the reviews and the compensation stuff. And going back to the whole idea of feedback, I think that doing yearly reviews, I mean, I'm not a big fan of individual reviews to begin with, but doing the yearly reviews, I think just misses the point because you've taken that feedback cycle. Somebody does something great in January, you don't say anything because our performance reviews are 12 months later, and then you either forget about it or you reward them and they forget what they did, or maybe in between they do something not so great and then you focus on that, and it just completely breaks that whole cycle.
So I wrote this story down in one of the books, probably Practical Ways to Lead an Innovative Organization. I got great feedback from one of my bosses back in the 70s. He said, Johanna, you are really good at getting a project to 96%, 95%, even my maybe 98. Oh, well, up to 98% done. And you don't really get it that last bit over. Somebody else has to come on in and clean up all the stuff for you. And this is back in the late 70s when we had much shorter projects. And I said, "Oh, was it this most recent one?" He said, "It was all four projects this year." And then I got really angry. I said, "Why didn't you tell me after the first one?" What? I mean, why did you let me go and half ass four more projects without telling me? I could have done a much better job if you had told me more faster. And he said, "Oh, I guess that's feedback for me too." So I now have checklists because I have no finishing energy. I will procrastinate. So I have a checklist for finishing every single thing I ever have to do. That's why I started to write about release criteria back in the 80s because I there are a lot of people like me. We love to start. We are even fine in the middle. Those last three steps. Oh my God. It's like it's just terrible. This I actually put on my calendar today, finish proofing effective public speaking because I only have a dozen things left to do there. And now I can after that I can create the index, figure out what the print books are going to be, get the Kickstarter going. I mean, I have more stuff to do on that project, but I need to finish this part of the book. I hate this part. Hate it. I get, you probably can tell how much I hate it. So I have a checklist, and every single time, my checklists have little tiny tasks, so I can finish them in an hour or less, and that's the only way I know to succeed.
Yeah, no, you hit on two things there. So one, I have the same problem. I like to start things. I have my finishing power is small. But one thing I've really enjoyed lately is I've been doing a lot. You mentioned releases on like the continuous integration, continuous delivery side. And I've gotten to the point where I know I'm bad at all that stuff. So I've just automated all of it. So I just press a button and now I'm like, okay, great. I don't have to remember to do all those things. I don't have to put in that last little bit of effort. It just kind of does it. Um, but also, one of the big revelations to me over the past, I don't know, a couple years, 20 years, I don't know how long it's been, but was you mentioned breaking stuff down into smaller parts. And that has been a huge boon for me, is just everything I do, I try to just break it down into really small steps because it just has so many advantages, and like you can get interrupted and you don't lose your train of thought and all of these things. I don't know if you know G. Paul Hill, if that name rings a bell, but he
Yeah,
has
yeah,
many more much smaller steps. and
Yes.
his change harvesting and all that. But he's got some great ideas around that. But yeah, that's definitely that is like the that's the only way I can work anymore. So
So I actually wrote an article in 99 or something. Um, on my very first job at a school in the middle, I think it was in August. This would be August of 77. I thought it was a 4 week task. So I was 25% done at the end of the first week and 50% done at the end of the second, and 75% done at the end of the third. I was 90% done at the end of the fourth. I was 92% at the end of the fifth. I was 93% at the end of the sixth. And that's when my manager took pity on me and he said, "Do you have any idea when you'll be done with this?" I said, "No. I have no idea. I can show you my engineering notebook. I can show you all the experiments I've done, all the things I've tried. I have no idea when I'll be done." He said, "That's because your tasks are way too big. What is the first thing you will do?" And he said, "Write that down. And what is the second thing you will do? Write that down." And so I learned about the value of inch pebbles. Some guy in the Air Force in the 40s came up with this idea. I applied it to software. And so inch pebbles are just like 1 or 2 day stories. And for me, I actually use them in almost everything I do. That's why I have checklists with very small pieces of work. So Jeepa is a really smart guy, and if your listeners have not yet read his stuff or watched his stuff or got this many smaller steps,
many, yeah, and then yeah, many
yeah,
more smaller stuff.
many more smaller
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's it. They should absolutely read everything he writes. He is brilliant. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that brings me on to estimates. So you want to tell stories, I'll tell a story. I started working at this place, and one of the very first staff meetings, I got assigned this thing, and the lady comes in and says, "Okay, so when do you think you'll be done? Can you give me an estimate?" And I was like, I literally just said to her, I was like, "I've never done this before. I don't know what yeah, like I don't know. The look on my face must have said something, but I was like, luckily, one of the other guys who was sitting there was like, "Oh yeah, this will probably take like a week or whatever." And I was like, "Okay." But I was just like, I'm like, how do you expect somebody to give an estimate on something that they've absolutely never done before? Like, I don't know. That just struck me as,
Well, and I I don't see why any manager asks because that's the wrong question, right? I mean, so I live around Boston. How long will it take me to get into Boston if I have a client in the financial district? Well, it could take me as little as 20 minutes if everybody is home for the day, or up to 2 hours if there's a lot of traffic. How long will it take me? I don't know. I mean, and I literally do not know. So instead of how long will it take, the real question is how much can I get? Right, if a manager asks this, how much can I get if I invest in you for a week? And you might say, I don't know until I've done 1 day of work, but I will know something after a day of work. Or let me go for a week and then give you what I have. And we can decide if you want to invest in more. The more we talk about predicting time or how much it will cost, the less we talk about value and investment. And value and investment are the only two interesting questions. Because how much time will it take? We've never done any of this before, right? I've written millions of words and I've not written this book yet, right? Or I have not written this blog post yet. How much time do I want to invest is a much better question. And I actually time box a lot of my work.
Mhm.
So I often time box my blog posts because if I'm going more than an hour, I probably have too much for one blog post, right? That I can break this up into 2 or 3 series, right? I can do something else. But the more I want to invest in something, the less I can possibly know about how long it will take, because we have no idea of the risks or what I learned this from JB Rainsberger, the accidental complication, not just the regular complexity of the problem.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good advice. I do remember this one job where somebody asked me it was not long after I'd start there. He's like, well, how long would it take you to fix this? And I said, well, I was like, let's invest a week and see where we end up, right? And we can definitely make it better in a week. We might not get everything we want fixed, but in 1 week's time we'll be better off, and then we can decide if it's worth it to spend another week. But it is changing and reframing the conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so I have a lot of listeners who are consultants. So we should talk. You wrote a book called The Successful Independent Consultant.
Yes.
About that.
I believe I called it successful independent consulting.
Oh, is that it? Okay. We
Let
should
me
get
see
that right.
if I can find it. Because I it's not that my goal in life is to um write a book about that, but my kids have now teased me that you write a book about everything, Mom. Well, yeah, because I'm explaining it to myself. So,
Yeah, no, actually, that's what I found. Like a lot of my writing is it's useful for other people, but I really write it for me.
well, and um I wrote this book. I put it in the chat so
Okay.
you can actually go there if you want. Um, but I wrote this book because I found that so many independents were really solving their customers' problems, but not creating a business that would work for them. And the problem is, as a consultant, you have to work on and in the business, right? And that's really hard, right? Because almost all of us got into consulting because we really like the problems, right? Working in the business, solving these problems, offering value to our clients. That's all fun and really, really exciting, and you get to make a difference in the work and the products and the people's lives. It's a blast. And if we don't manage our businesses correctly, we don't have enough money to do it again. So I ran a workshop, and one of the people in the workshop said, "Oh, this first part is all about your consulting engine." So I stole that. And part one is build your consulting engine, and part two is create and maintain a business that works for you. Because everybody's idea of a business is different. And some people really want a multi-million-dollar business that requires other people. Um, I did not want that because I wanted to take vacations with my kids in the summer and in the winter. So I did not need quite that much money, but I did want to send them to college. And I only wanted to work with me, not with not even one other person. And so I had a very different idea of what my solo consulting business would be. And I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of consultants who come out of industry, they tend to just replicate what they were doing in industry. And so that'd be my one piece of advice, like you said, is it's your business. You get to make the rules, which is a really incredible thing when you finally figure that out. And you're like, I don't have to work Fridays if I don't want to, or I can, yeah, or I can just tell the customer, hey, I want to miss rush hour, so I'll show up from 10 to 2 and that's it. And they're like, okay. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Or if you're like me and you only quote projects and
mhm,
you quote them based on value, then you can say to customers or to potential customers, my standard terms are I will give you a 10% discount on this price if you pay me all of it up front.
yeah,
and and they often take that, because for me a 10% discount for all the money up front makes a very big difference. These my clients are lovely humans. but their organizations are so strange. One of them actually said to me, "We have net 45 business days." I said, "Okay, so that's net 60. I don't work for net 60, right? I'm not going to wait 60 days after I deliver my final work to you to get paid. I'm just not going to do it." And they said, "But that's our standard terms." I said, "It's not my standard terms." So if you want me to give you a proposal for your standard terms, then it's 4 times the price I quoted, because it's not worth my time to wait that long. And I cannot afford to wait that long at the price I quoted. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, I wish I would have figured out sooner, and the other piece of advice I would give people is always start out with your contract and your terms and have them
Yes.
negotiate to you. Like a lot of times people go in and like, okay, they leave industry like, oh, I'm looking for a job. The first person comes along like, okay, and they're great. What do you want? And they let them dictate the terms. And
Yeah.
really, if you walk in with your contract, you have much more power and leverage, and it's much easier to have them negotiate to your terms than you negotiating to theirs. So.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But not a, it takes a little while to figure some of these things out. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
I wrote that down.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing I recommend to people is to talk to other people who are out there doing consulting and stuff and build a network and join. There's a whole bunch of business development type groups and things that you can join to help each other out because there's no need to learn all these lessons the hard way.
Oh, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else that you want to talk about
Um,
that we haven't hit
um,
on?
I think any other questions you have are good, and otherwise, I think we're good.
Okay. No, I think that's good. We had a very good and broad conversation. It was great. Thank you so much for reaching out. That I was ecstatic when I saw your name. I was like, oh yeah, I recognize that name. So
Oh, good.
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So let me just say one more thing about that, right? You're a famous guy. I I have my own community. I
Yeah.
never quite know how famous I am. And we did not have a direct connection, but I saw you on social media and I reached out. And all of you who are listening out there, you can do exactly the same thing. What's the worst thing that happens? Right? Maybe Samuel isn't the right guy, or the right podcast for you, but every single one of you has expertise and a really great perspective on things. It's time for us to be reaching out to past um, our normal audiences.
Yeah, no, I do think that's great. Yeah, and anybody wants to reach out to me, I mean, I'm plenty approachable. I'm happy to talk to anyone. So uh,
Yeah.
great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabuexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the LV Experiment.